In 1991, a team of weekend divers thought they were just exploring another wreck off the coast of New Jersey. But when they reached the ocean floor, they froze. Something was down there. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. It was massive. It was intact. And inside was a secret that had been buried for nearly 50 years. A secret so strange, so impossible, that even the historians refused to believe it. Until the divers brought back the evidence. And what they found inside that iron tomb was more horrifying than anyone expected. Alright, so picture this. It's a crisp September morning in 1991, and these three divers, John Chatterton, Richie Kohler, and Bill Nagel, they're about 60 miles off the New Jersey coast. Now, Bill's got this boat called the Seeker, and he's heard rumors about a mystery wreck in these waters. Local fishermen keep snagging their nets on something big down there, but nobody knows what it is. The water's murky. You know how it gets in the Atlantic. Visibility's maybe 15 feet on a good day. These guys drop down 230 feet, and at first, it's just the usual stuff. Sand, rocks, maybe some scattered debris. But then, through the gloom, they see it. A shape, massive, man-made, and intact. As they get closer, the details start coming into focus. There's a tower jutting up from what looks like a hull, a deck gun pointing into the void. And then it hits them. This isn't just any wreck. This is a submarine. A German U-boat. But here's where it gets weird. When they finally worked up the courage to slip inside through a hatch, they realized this wasn't just a wreck. It was a tomb. And it had been waiting down there for almost half a century. Now here's the thing that didn't make sense. According to every official record, every military database, every historian they could find, there were no German submarines sunk in these waters. None. The closest documented U-boat wreck was hundreds of miles away. So what the hell was this thing doing here? John Chatterton, he's the kind of guy who doesn't let mysteries slide. He starts digging, calls the Naval Historical Center, contacts German U-boat experts, even reaches out to old Wehrmacht veterans. And every single one of them tells him the same thing. You're wrong. There's no U-boat where you say there is. But the evidence was right there, 230 feet below the surface. A 250-foot steel monster that definitely didn't swim down there by itself. So how did a massive Nazi submarine end up just miles from New York City, when according to every expert on the planet, it shouldn't even exist? The first time they went inside, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as it had been in 1945. Personal belongings, scattered around a toothbrush here, a comb there, someone's harmonica sitting on a bunk. Letters from home, still in their envelopes, written in careful German script. These weren't just artifacts. You know, these were pieces of people's lives. Real men, who had families, who wrote letters, who probably hummed songs on that harmonica during the long, terrifying hours underwater. But here's what really got to them. In the control room, they found the boat's log, entries right up until the final day. The last entry, scrawled in increasingly desperate handwriting, talked about American destroyers closing in, about taking on water, about a final dive that they knew they might not come back from. But the strangest part, there were no identification numbers visible anywhere, no markings that could tell them who these men were, or which U-boat this actually was. It was like someone had deliberately erased its identity. This is where John Chatterton's life basically gets hijacked by a 50-year-old mystery. The guy becomes completely consumed. He's making dive after dive, sometimes alone, sometimes with other members of his team. Each time, he brings back more pieces of the puzzle. He starts learning German so he can read the personal letters, contacts U-boat museums in Germany, spends his weekends in dusty archives, going through microfilm records that haven't been touched in decades. His wife thinks he's losing his mind. His diving buddies think he's taking this way too seriously. But John can't let it go. Because down there in that submarine, there are 49 men who've been missing for nearly half a century, and their families, if any are still alive, they deserve to know what happened. So he keeps digging, keeps diving. And then, buried deep in forgotten German naval records, he finds something that changes everything. Okay, so here's where this story gets really wild. John finally identifies the submarine. It's U-869, under the command of Helmut Neuerberg, but according to German records, U-869 was sunk off Gibraltar in February 1945. The German Navy even has witness accounts of the sinking. But Allied records, they tell a completely different story. According to American and British intelligence, U-869 was never anywhere near Gibraltar. Instead, They tracked it heading for the American coast on what the Germans called Operation Drumbeat, a final desperate mission to attack Allied shipping right off the US mainland. So you've got two completely contradictory official records. The Germans say their submarine sank in the Mediterranean. The Allies say it was heading for America. And here it is, sitting on the ocean floor off New Jersey. Someone was lying. Or someone made a massive mistake. But which records were wrong, and why? Through painstaking research, John finally pieces together what really happened. U-869 had been given secret orders to attack Allied shipping off the American coast. But the mission was so classified that even German Naval Command didn't know the submarine's true destination. When U-869 failed to return, the German Navy assumed it had been sunk in Gibraltar, where they thought it was supposed to be. They had no idea their submarine was actually thousands of miles away, prowling the waters off New York. But the Americans knew. Oh, they definitely knew. They'd been tracking U-869 through radio intercepts and sonar contacts. And on March 11, 1945, they found it. The attack was swift and decisive. Depth charges from a destroyer escort caught the submarine as it tried to surface. Water flooded in through ruptured hull plates. The crew had maybe 30 seconds to realize what was happening before the ocean claimed them. You have to understand what those final moments must have been like. Picture 49 men, most of them barely out of their teens, trapped inside a steel tube 230 feet underwater. The lights failing, water rushing in. The crushing realization that they're never going home. Some of them probably had time to write final letters. Others might have just sat there, holding photographs of their families, waiting for the end. The submarine's design meant that once it started flooding, there was no escape. No emergency hatches. No rescue protocol. They died as they had lived for months. Together, in the dark, surrounded by the endless pressure of the deep ocean. But here's the thing that really gets to you. This wasn't just a military engagement. This was a tomb that had been waiting half a century to tell its story. The most remarkable part of this whole story isn't the mystery or the detective work. It's what John Chatterton decided to do with what he'd learned. See, he'd spent years getting to know these men through their personal belongings. He'd read their letters, held their photographs, even learned their names. And he realized that somewhere in Germany, there might still be families who never knew what happened to their sons, their brothers, their fathers. Families who'd spent 50 years wondering if their loved ones were still alive somewhere, maybe in a prison camp, maybe with amnesia, maybe just too ashamed to come home. So John started reaching out, through U-boat veteran associations, through German naval museums, through genealogy records. And slowly, incredibly, he started finding them. Brothers who were still alive. Nephews who'd grown up hearing stories. Grandchildren who'd never known their grandfather's fate. One by one, he gave them closure. He told them their family member hadn't been forgotten, that someone had found them, had honored their memory, had brought their story to light. But even after solving the identity of U-869, questions remained. Why had the German records been so wrong? How had a submarine on a secret mission been lost to history so completely? The answer reveals something disturbing about how war records are kept. Military bureaucracy, it turns out, is just as prone to mistakes and cover-ups as any other bureaucracy. When U-869 disappeared, it was easier for German command to assume it had been sunk where it was supposed to be, rather than admit they'd lost track of one of their own submarines. The Americans, meanwhile, classified the sinking so heavily that even decades later, researchers couldn't access the full records. It was just another enemy submarine destroyed, filed away, and forgotten. 49 men fell through the cracks of history because paperwork mattered more than people. Here's what really stayed with the divers. Though every time they went down to that wreck, they weren't just exploring. They were visiting a gravesite. Those personal artifacts they brought up, the harmonica, the letters, the photographs, those belonged to real people who'd died terrible deaths. John Chatterton talks about how he'd sometimes just sit there inside the submarine, surrounded by the personal belongings of dead men, and think about how random it all was. These German sailors were probably just regular guys who got drafted into a war they didn't start. They probably missed their families, complained about the food, told jokes to keep their spirits up. And then one day, in a moment of violence that lasted maybe 2 minutes, they all died together in the dark. The ocean kept their secret for 46 years. But secrets, no matter how deep you bury them, have a way of surfacing eventually. The discovery of U-869 didn't just solve one mystery, it opened up dozens of others. Historians started re-examining other lost submarines. Families began reaching out with their own stories of relatives who disappeared without explanation. It turned out that the ocean floor is littered with vessels that don't match the official records. Ships that were supposed to be somewhere else. Crews that were supposed to be accounted for. Stories that were supposed to be finished, but never really were. John's discovery proved something important. That even the most thoroughly documented war in human history still has gaps. Still has unknowns. Still has people who fell through the cracks and were forgotten. And sometimes, it takes a group of weekend divers to set the record straight. You know what's really striking about this whole story? It's not the technology, or the military strategy, or even the historical significance. It's the human element. The fact that John Chatterton, this recreational diver from New Jersey, cared enough about a bunch of dead German sailors to spend years of his life tracking down their families. He didn't have to do that. He could have just logged the wreck, taken some cool photos, and moved on to the next dive site. But something about those personal artifacts, those glimpses into the lives of the crew, it got to him. He realized that these were unjust enemy combatants. They were sons and brothers and fathers who never made it home, and their families deserved to know what happened. That's the kind of humanity that makes you believe in people, you know, even in the middle of a war story, even dealing with enemy forces. John saw past all that to the basic human truth, that everyone deserves to be remembered, and everyone deserves to be found. So that's the story of U-869, a submarine that wasn't supposed to exist, discovered by divers who refused to let sleeping ghosts lie. What started as a weekend adventure turned into a decade-long investigation that rewrote the history books and gave closure to families who'd been waiting half a century for answers. The next time you're out on the water, remember that the ocean floor is covered with stories like this one. Mysteries waiting to be solved. People waiting to be found. Secrets that time forgot, but that someone, someday, might have the courage to bring back to the surface. Because sometimes, the most valuable thing you can pull from the depths isn't treasure or artifacts. It's truth. It's closure. It's the simple recognition that the people who came before us, even our enemies, were human beings with stories worth telling. That's the real discovery here. Not just a submarine, but the reminder that history isn't just dates and battles and official records. It's people, real people, with real lives and real families, who loved them and mourned them and waited for them to come home. And sometimes, thanks to the dedication of people like John Chatterton, they finally do. If this story opened your eyes to the mysteries still hidden beneath our oceans, hit that subscribe button. There are thousands of stories like this one, waiting to be told. Stories of discovery, of obsession, of ordinary people who refuse to let the past stay buried. Because history isn't just what's written in the books. Sometimes, it's what's written in the depths, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it back to light. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember that every dive, every discovery, every moment of curiosity brings us one step closer to understanding the full story of who we are and where we came from.